What's up, guys? It's your boy, BibleLover1234, back with another video. 2024 has come and gone. Last video I uploaded in 2024 was, I believe, in October, and that was part of the in-depth series where we look in-depth at the book of Mark, passage by passage. We also have a series where we're doing chapter by chapter studies. I haven't uploaded a video on that since I think September, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not ready or willing to make a video on that anytime soon. I'm more focused on this in-depth series. However, I don't like to leave series unfinished, so I will hopefully finish that series and also the series on essential Christian beliefs. But until then, we are continuing our video on the in-depth series of Mark. Last video that I made on this series, we talked about Mark chapter 2 verses 13 to 22. A lot happened in that passage. Jesus talked with the Pharisees or John's disciples about why his disciples don't fast. But now we're looking at a different passage, the last passage of this chapter, verses 23 through to I believe verse 27. And while I was looking at it earlier, it looked very interesting to talk about. That's what we're talking about. That's what we will be talking about. Mark 2 verse 23 through to 28. So without further ado, get your Bibles. We read from the ESV for the series. And let us begin. I feel like I forgot something. Let us begin. Alright, so verse 23 says, got my Bible here. One Sabbath this is referencing Jesus. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields. And as him and his disciples, as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And notice that already the writer, Mark, tells us that it's happening on the Sabbath. Sabbath is usually viewed as a time, especially by the Jewish leaders of this time, as a day of rest, which it is, but also a day where nothing should happen. The Jewish leaders have wrote into what the text actually says on the Sabbath, so much so that they believe not a single thing can be done on the Sabbath, even something good like plucking heads of grain to feed yourself, because the disciples were hungry. And the Pharisees were saying to Jesus, look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? So you could see the Pharisees' mindset is that plucking heads of grain and doing this work is not right to do on the Sabbath. Now, we hear about the laws concerning the Sabbath in Exodus 20, and also I believe Exodus chapter 31 touches on the Sabbath as well. Exodus 20 tells us this, beginning at verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall do no work, not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. So notice it does say, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work. So notice how it contrasts work done within the week, work that is given for you to provide for yourself, and work that is not necessarily something to do with good things, but just regular work to provide for yourself. That's the work that shouldn't be done. And then the Sabbath day is a day of rest. It's contrasted. So the Pharisees now are saying that your disciples are doing work, they're plucking these heads of grain on the Sabbath, and this is not lawful to do. But notice what Jesus says in verse 25. And Jesus said to them, have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, he and those who were with him? Jesus is referencing a story in 1 Samuel 21. We're going to go there. How David entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him. So let's see what Jesus is talking about here, because he's using this story to combat what the Pharisees are saying. He's going to use the story to combat what the Pharisees are saying. So let's go to 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel, we're going to chapter 21. 1 Samuel chapter 21, beginning at verse 1. Then David came to Nob, to Ahimelech actually, the priest. And Ahimelech came to meet David, trembling, and said to him, why are you alone and no one with you? Verse 2, and David said to Ahimelech the priest, the king has charged me of a matter and said to me, let no one know anything of the matter about which I send you, and with which I have charged you. I have made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place. Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever is here. And the priest answered David, I have no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread. This is what Jesus was referencing when he said the bread of the presence. There is holy bread if the young men have kept themselves from women. And David answered the priest, truly, women have been kept from us as always when I go on an expedition. The vessels of the young men are holy, even when it is an ordinary journey. He's talking about their bodies. How much more today will their vessels be holy? So the priest gave him the holy bread, for there was no bread there but the bread of the presence. This is what Jesus was referencing, which is removed from before the Lord to be replaced by hot bread on the day it is taken. Now, this is interesting why Jesus mentions this story, because when we read about the bread of the presence, look what God has to say about it. Going to Leviticus chapter 24, look what God, or Yahweh, that's the Lord, has to say about the bread of the presence. Leviticus 24. This is a set of commands given by God in the book of Leviticus, beginning at verse 5. It says here, you shall take fine flour and bake 12 loaves from it. 2/10 of an ephah shall be in each loaf. And you shall set them in 2 piles, 6 in a pile, on the table of pure gold before the Lord. And you shall put pure frankincense on each pile, that it may go with the bread as a memorial portion, as a food offering to the Lord. So this is a food offering that's being made specifically for the Lord. Every Sabbath day, Aaron, the high priest, shall arrange it before the Lord regularly. It is from the people of Israel as a covenant forever. So this bread signifies that covenant with the Lord. And it shall be for Aaron and his sons. The bread he's talking about, it shall be for Aaron and his sons, meaning the priest, the high priest, and the sons of the high priest. And they shall eat it in a holy place, since it is for him a most holy portion out of the Lord's offering, a perpetual due. Since the high priest represents the Lord to the people, the high priest is the one that is given this bread to eat, him and his sons. So this bread is not for anybody else but the high priest and his sons. However, we come to 1 Samuel 21, and Ahimelech, the high priest, gives David this bread to eat. And the Lord does not strike them down. The Lord has shown that he will strike down people for going against his commands. We know about the story of Uriah touching the ark. The Lord struck him down because he's not supposed to touch the ark. However, in this case, David ate the bread of the presence, which is only for the high priest and his sons, as said in Leviticus 24. And the Lord did not strike him down, nor did he strike down his men. This can only tell us that the Lord believes that doing good can sometimes be placed higher than some ceremonial commands. I'll repeat that. Doing good can sometimes be placed higher than some ceremonial commands. That's why David was able to eat the bread of the presence and not be struck down by the Lord, because he was doing good to feed his men, and the high priest was doing a good thing to allow David to have food to keep himself and his men nourished. And they were holy in their bodies as well. So now we come back to Mark 2. And now with this information, we could see how Jesus uses this story to support his point. Verse 24 again. And the Pharisees were saying to Jesus, look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? And Jesus said to them, have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry? He and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him. What this is trying to say is that in this example here, doing good for the people with you and for yourself can sometimes be prioritized over keeping ceremonial commands like who can eat the bread of the presence. And if this is the case, Jesus is also making a statement, that an overall statement, that doing good can sometimes be prioritized over other commands that God has given. Because the disciples are doing something good by feeding themselves because they're hungry, because they're feeding themselves, because they have to help Jesus do his work. That can be prioritized over not doing anything on the Sabbath, as the Pharisees are trying to say. This could be prioritized over no work being done on the Sabbath, because this is a specific thing that's being done, which is simply good. It's a good thing to do. And since it's a good thing to do, it can be prioritized over a command like keeping the Sabbath. Or it could even be said that they are still keeping the Sabbath, they're just doing good on the Sabbath. And you see that sentence stated specifically in Matthew chapter 12, I believe verse 8, the parallel to the story. So Jesus says in verse 27, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. What does Jesus mean by that? Think of it this way. When your parents give you a toy, they give you a toy. The toy is given to you, right? The toy is given to you. It's for your well-being. It's for your enjoyment. It's for your amusement. It's for your fun. You can add any word to it. The toy is for you and for your priorities. You are not made for the toy. You're not there to give the toy fun. No, you're not there to give the toy playing time. No. Everything about the toy is for you. So if the Sabbath is made for you, for man, that means everything about the Sabbath day is supposed to benefit human beings. We should be able to eat on the Sabbath, to keep our bodies in nutrition, to help others on the Sabbath day. We should be able to do good things on the Sabbath. And most importantly, if we're doing ministry, we should be able to do good on the Sabbath. The Sabbath was not made as a day to burden men and to keep them in bondage or chains. No, it was made to give us rest. And that's its purpose. So the Pharisees, you can see they're trying to put strict rules and regulations on the Sabbath day. Jesus says that's not it at all. Sometimes God will allow good to be prioritized over some commands he even gives himself. And this is an example where I, as God myself, am allowing good to be prioritized, good in my disciples' eating, to give them energy, to help me in my ministry. I'm allowing this good to be prioritized over the keeping of this command of the Sabbath. The keeping of your version of the Sabbath, not working, not doing anything. I'm allowing that to triumph over what you're saying. And that's why Jesus says, so the Son of Man, which is a title that Jesus says is for himself. He said that multiple times. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. And this is a very interesting point here. Because remember, if we go to Exodus 20, let's go back to Exodus 20 again. Notice who's speaking in Exodus 20. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord Yahweh. I am Yahweh your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So notice who's talking. It's the God of Israel. In verse 8, when the Sabbath is mentioned, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Who is speaking? Yahweh, the God of Israel. When the Sabbath is mentioned even before Exodus 20, Exodus chapter 16, verse 23, he said to them, this is what, notice, Yahweh, this is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till the morning. So notice, in Exodus 16, God tells us that the Sabbath is his. It's a holy Sabbath to who? The Lord, to the God of Israel, to the King of the universe, Yahweh God. The Sabbath is to him. So the Sabbath is the Lord's. It's his. He is the one that created it. He's the one that set it up, and he's the one that made it. And if you remember Exodus 20, it literally told us for the Lord rested on the Sabbath day and made it holy. That's from Genesis chapter 2, where we read in verse 4 here. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. So notice all these passages are telling us that the Lord, Yahweh God, the God who is in charge and ownership, who has created all human beings, who has created the universe, the God who created in Genesis 1, the Sabbath is his. He's the Lord of the Sabbath. Yahweh God is the only Lord of the Sabbath. But then Jesus comes here in Mark chapter 2 and verse 28 and says, you guys, you priests, you guys are complaining about my disciples doing good work on the Sabbath to help my ministry. Well, look at how David was able to eat bread only meant for the priests, because he was doing things that God approved of. Well, if David can do such a thing and God approves of that, then how much more can I allow my disciples to do this good work on the Sabbath day? Because guess what? The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath, and I am the Son of Man. If Jesus is the Son of Man, that means Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. And if Yahweh of the Old Testament is the only Lord of the Sabbath, and yet Jesus in the New Testament is the Lord of the Sabbath, the only correlation that can be made is that Yahweh of the Old Testament is Jesus Christ. You see in Mark chapter 2, we already read at the beginning of the chapter how Jesus has the authority to forgive sins, but now he has the authority to say that he owns the Sabbath and he can prioritize other things above just keeping this day. This is divinity shown right here, that Jesus can say, I can prioritize things above even my own laws. In the parallel passage of Matthew 12, I usually don't mention parallel passages much, but in the parallel passage in Matthew 12, Jesus says, don't you see, I'm going to actually read it for you. In Matthew 12, we're looking at verse 5. Or have you not read in the law, he's talking about the general Torah, how on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane. The word used here literally means to desecrate, to profane, or the NASB translates it to break. How the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless. He's mentioning several things here. But as this commentator, Benson commentary, I've used his material a lot, I'm going to read what he says here. Jesus does not mean that the words following were to be found in the law, but only that they might be read in the law. How the priests were obliged on the Sabbath days to perform such servile work. Servile. This word itself means good work to help others, to perform such servile work in the temple as, considered separately from the end of it, would have been a profanation of the Sabbath, but really was not so, because it was necessary to the public worship of God. So God would say that these works they're doing are bad and are breaking the Sabbath. But because these works are necessary for the worship of God and thus are good works, they can be allowed to be happening on the Sabbath day. He says, on that day, as well as on other days, they made up the fires, they killed, flayed, and dressed the sacrifices, and performed other pieces of manual labor necessary to the religious service which God had established among them. Nay, besides the continual burnt offering, the priests were obliged on the Sabbaths to sacrifice 2 lambs extraordinary, by which their servile work was that day double of what it was on other days of the week. So he's saying that in the Torah, in the law, it tells us how the priests had work to do even on the Sabbath. They had to set the sacrifices ready on the Sabbath. They had to kill on the Sabbath, light fires on the Sabbath. But God allowed these things, even though they would seem to be breaking the Sabbath. He allowed them because they were needed for his service. So God prioritized these works because they're good over the simple keeping of his command. And if Jesus is saying, I can let my disciples, them getting food to help my ministry, I could prioritize that over the keeping of the Sabbath as well. I have to be the one who gave the law. I have to be the one who gave you the Sabbath. I have to be Yahweh. I have to be the Son of God, the Son of Man, the Lord of the Sabbath. This is Jesus we're talking about. I haven't done this in a while, but it's very nice to get back here and speak on something I love, someone I love, Jesus Christ. And I won't lie to you, some of these months have been hard. I won't go into details, obviously, but I've been trying some things. I wanted things to go my way in certain aspects of life, and some of them haven't gone my way, and I won't lie to you, I'm disappointed. There's still time to see if these things will go my way, but I'm disappointed. But when I remember who I'm serving, who could literally say that he owns a day of the week, and he owns every day of the week really, but could say in the face of the religious leaders that he owns the Sabbath day, it's his day, he's the Lord of the Sabbath, he can say what's right and wrong on that specific day. That's who I serve. And he said that he wants to make my life peaceful. Paul says that all things work together for good for those who love him. That's Romans chapter 8, I believe. If that's the God I'm serving, then I have no need to worry about anything. And this is the God I hope you serve as well. The one who can tell people that he is the Lord of the Sabbath, that he is Yahweh of the Old Testament, and that he has the right to say what is good and what is bad on his day that he has mandated or said you should rest on. This is Jesus we're talking about. At the end, I also just want to remind you that in the same chapter, Jesus let us know that he is the Son of Man. Because in verse 6 of chapter 2, verse 5, Jesus tells the paralytic, son, your sins are forgiven. And then in verse 10, he says, but that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. He said to the paralytic, I say to you, rise, pick up your bed, and go home. So Jesus showed there that he is the Son of Man. So simply put, when Jesus says the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath, he's simply saying, so I, Jesus Christ, am Lord even of the Sabbath. Jesus Christ is Yahweh God. We learned this in Mark chapter 1, then we see it again in chapter 2. So I hope you have a wonderful night, a wonderful new year. I don't know when I'll make the next video, but hopefully it'll be soon. God bless you. And with all that said, Bible Lover 1234,